Hello class. Amanda, Nazila, and I will be discussing discrimination surrounding youth's gender and sexual orientation. We will be providing information regarding practices that can be done to lessen discrimination in the classroom and further recommendations for educators. Our presentation will go as follows. First, we will introduce discrimination in children. This will include issues with gender and consequences of gender discrimination, and issues with sexual orientation and consequences of sexual orientation discrimination. Afterwards, we will discuss practices for gender discrimination, which will include various practices for educators, schools, and also the home. To finish, we will be doing the same for sexual orientation discrimination. Defining discrimination. Discrimination can be defined as unfair treatment resulting from harmful actions towards others because of their membership in a particular group. In the case of gender discrimination, these harmful actions are aimed towards gender minorities. In the case of sexual orientation discrimination, these harmful actions are aimed towards sexual orientation minorities, which usually are LGBT individuals. It has been shown that when an individual experiences discrimination, stigma, or prejudice, this affects how they perceive themselves and how they approach interactions with others. Children and discrimination. Most children understand the definition of discrimination by age 10. The most reported forms of discrimination among youth are name-calling, unequal sharing of goods, and social exclusion. Discriminatory actions follow a continuum and can range from mild, for example, ignoring someone, to harmful, for example, inflicting physical harm. It was found that when engaging in discriminatory actions, children do not consider their actions as discriminatory if they believe that the target is responsible. Also, children do not view a perpetrator's discriminatory actions as discriminatory if they believe that they were acting unintentionally. Issues with gender. Gender discrimination is an umbrella term and can include sexual harassment, gender bias, and sexism. In children, gender discrimination occurs between peers, usually other gendered peers. For example, Kowalski and Kanitkar found high rates of gender bias and discrimination among kindergarteners, including instances in which children were ridiculed for engaging in cross-sex type play by their peers. According to Ares and Leeper, the majority of young girls have experienced gender discrimination in the form of sexual harassment, academic sexism, and athletic sexism. Due to this, Brown, Bigler, and Chu discovered that adolescent girls have greater awareness of their lower social status, and in turn have greater sensitivity towards discriminatory treatment based on gender. Consequences of gender discrimination. Since the perpetrators of gender discrimination tend to be other gendered peers, the presence of gender discrimination may affect adolescents' motivation and ability to form other gendered friends. Youth who are experiencing gender discrimination often avoid social interactions with those who look like perpetrators. For example, a girl experiences gender discrimination from a boy. She may learn to expect such negative actions from boys and avoid social interactions with them to further prevent discrimination. In the long run, this may affect the way this girl relates to boys. This avoidance may be a coping mechanism through which youth manage their gender discrimination experiences. Andrew, Santos, Cook, and Martin found that youth who experienced high levels of gender discrimination in middle school had less increase in other gendered friends compared to the norm. If adolescents are deterred from making other gendered friends due to discrimination, they only make same-gendered friends. For example, a girl may seek same-gendered friends on the basis that they have also experienced discrimination. When gender discrimination affects adolescents' friendship, this can also bleed into moral development. For example, with less friends, adolescents can be missing listeners for their moral narratives, or can be less exposed to moral experiences of others. Furthermore, gender discrimination can lead to low self-esteem, depression, and heightened stress in youth. Issues with sexual orientation. LGBT adolescents experience excess discrimination and victimization related to their sexual minority statuses compared to their heterosexual counterparts. LGBT youth report being bullied and physically assaulted as forms of discrimination. For example, 10% of lesbian and bisexual females and 24% of gay and bisexual males reported high levels of discrimination, which included 10 or more assaults at school in the past year. Also, 45% of LGBT youth reported having had their personal property stolen or deliberately damaged at school. Furthermore, it was found that LGBT males reported more sexual orientation discrimination than females. Consequences of sexual orientation discrimination. Being stigmatized and discriminated against leads to elevated risk of emotional distress among LGBT youth. Also, LGBT youth score significantly higher on scales for depressive symptoms, suicidal ideation, and self-harm. This is mediated by perceived discrimination. Furthermore, LGBT youth report more instances of skipping school, usually because they feel unsafe. Lastly, sexuality-based harassment is associated with greater odds of substance use. For example, vaping, smoking, drinking for adolescents.
So now I'll be addressing gender discrimination in the classroom. Research has shown the importance of intervening between kindergarten and 12th grade in order to work towards eradicating gender biases. Interventions and evidence-based practices have been known to spread awareness on gender discrimination and decrease students' engagement in gender-related prejudice behaviors. So that being said, there's a significant need to educate children about gender, as well as address gender discrimination both in school and at home with parents, in order to develop children's understanding and empathy towards the issue. So now I'll be presenting 4 evidence-based practices which help children better understand gender discrimination. The first is a 12-week arts curriculum focused on gender and targeting gender attitudes and social norms. So depending on the age of the children, they partake in several different activities which aim to deconstruct gender stereotypes. So for example, kindergarten children learned about animals which had non-binary and gender fluid characteristics. So for example, the Komodo dragon and the seahorse. Results for this practice showed that more children reported their gender in terms which were gender expansive after being exposed to the curriculum, and that their attitudes towards people who engaged in certain gender expansive activities or roles. So for example, a girl who wears traditionally boy clothes or a boy who plays with Barbie dolls became more favorable. Next, we have Marie's transgender and gender nonconformity inclusive curriculum. So this was created by an educator named Marie Bednar, who was committed to including information about non-normative genders in her classroom. Her curriculum consisted of a series of 4 episodes where she begins by introducing some unwritten rules related to gender, relates gender to other issues of difference and marginalization, and finally discusses gender nonconformity in relation to gay characters. So findings for this practice showed that it developed children's vocabulary around different ways of identifying and expressing gender. So for example, this is using the right pronoun to respect people's affirmed gender, and it helped children open up on the issue of gender, as well as better understand characters in text and popular culture. Next, we have redesigning gender through dance for boys during physical education. This was created by Kate, a physical education and dance teacher, who identified a lack of engagement with dance by her male students in grade 5. And she identified this as being a pedagogy problem, and her goal was therefore to increase her male students' engagement, enjoyment, and confidence to dance. So through participation in hip-hop dance classes and by incorporating older male role models, she not only engaged boys, but also took them out of what is typically identified as being traditional forms of masculinity. So results show that this practice was a good alternative movement practice and should be incorporated into physical education, as it challenges the prevailing gender norms and allows for boys to express themselves in a constructive and artistic way. Finally, the last evidence-based practice is the FAIR program, which consists of 4 activities: the images in our minds activity, the toy sorting activity, the in the box, out of the box activity, and finally the marine life story. The goal of these activities were to challenge stereotypes. So for example, a prompt would be, why do you say cooking tools go into the pink box? Both men and women can cook. In fact, many great chefs are men. And the marine life story helped children learn the importance as well as how to treat others with respect through metaphors. And it also gave the opportunity to children to demonstrate how they would speak up if they witnessed a peer being discriminated against. So now for continued practice at home, parents can reinforce this by creating a learning environment that encourages gender development by offering a wide range of resources So toys, books, and prompts to allow the child to be exposed to diverse gender roles, avoiding assumptions when it comes to games boys and girls may want to play, and avoiding the use of exclusive and dividing language such as good boy or good girl, as well as being prepared to engage in discussions about gender. So like it's important to remember that curiosity about people's bodies is natural. And this is important because children begin learning about gender roles from the norms of their family and cultural background. Finally, here are some book recommendations. In the images here, we have Jacob's New Dress and Red, A Crayon Story.
So now I'm going to be discussing the practices that one can employ in order to combat the presence of and issues that come with sexual orientation discrimination. Online, there's an Alberta Education Guideline, PDF, that outlines the type of sexual orientation practices and discrimination that may take place in a classroom and what educators can do to combat it. So first and foremost, it talks about self-identification, which is basically asking students what their given pronouns are, what their legal names are and pronouns, and then asking them what they actually would prefer to be called. So what pronouns they're comfortable with and what name they would like to be called. This is important, especially for trans students, non-binary students, or other individuals. You also want to provide professional learning opportunities for educators. This can involve educator training, bias training, discussions in professional settings, and working with school staff and authority members in order to create a warm and respectful environment. Lastly, you want to have practices surrounding bullying in place. This can involve, first and foremost, recognizing that different forms of bullying does take place for homophobia, refraining students from using derogatory language and acting homophobically. You also want to urge students to not be bystanders and stand up and say something when they see homophobia. And lastly, if there are victims of homophobic bullying, you want to provide them with resources like mentoring, services, advisors, counselors, or queer straight alliances. So everything I just mentioned is kind of the tip of the iceberg in terms of what you can do. There's a lot that educators can do. First and foremost, they have to acknowledge their own biases and prejudices. They also have gaps in their own knowledge. So acknowledging the issue is the first step. Afterwards, you want to provide opportunities to students to learn about the LGBT community. So this can include literature and assignments that ask them to think critically about the community and what they know and what they don't know about it. Thirdly, you want to encourage conversations about sexuality and sexual orientation daily, not just when issues arise or problems, but integrate it into the activities and practices of a classroom to make it normal and destigmatized. Fourth, you want to provide resources and types of media to help contextualize and understand issues. I'll be discussing this a little bit later on. And all of this is done to reduce heteronormativity, which is the idea that only straight individuals exist with their straight partners. In reality, there's a rich environment filled with different types of communities. Lastly, you want to encourage this type of conversation, but you do not want to force it. Some students may be closeted or anxious, and you don't want to force them to talk about something they are not comfortable or ready to talk about. So to contextualize it, I'll give a scenario. Let's say if you're an educator and you have a student in your class that's gay because the parents told you that they're gay. You want the child to feel comfortable and included, but you notice no materials in your class is about sexual orientation. What can you do? Well, one simple solution is to swap out math problems that includes gay characters. For example, a math problem that says Sally and David went to the market to buy flowers for their upcoming wedding can be switched to Sally and Susan. This simple change can help form representation for queer characters and queer individuals. A child can see themselves in a math problem. All of this is essentially part of an LGBT inclusive curriculum, which is evidence-based. What LGBT inclusive curriculums do is it actually has been shown to reduce homophobic related school bullying in a lot of different schools, which is essentially the practice of including fiction, films, or other types of media or mass media to represent gay characters, gay authors, or gay issues. This can include books like Princess Ever After or Love, Simon, amongst many others. So what can schools specifically implement outside of just the classroom in terms of school boards? Well, one is consequences to homophobic language or action. So if you hear a child say you're so gay or other slurs, or actually bully another child for mannerisms or vocabulary that's quote unquote gay, you want to have consequences set in place right away, like written or verbal apologies, suspensions, detention, or expulsions. This is important for the victim to feel heard and understood. Secondly, you want to also have gay straight alliances, which is an evidence-based practice. It's an extracurricular activity for LGBT students, allies, and questioning students to come together, find a community, and feel heard. It also has been shown to reduce suicidality and suicide attempts among students who have health issues or mental health issues related to their sexuality. It reduces dating violence and threats, as well as violence in general for those youths. And it has been shown to drop up to 7 sexual minority bully victims in a given year. The longer the GSA, which is a gay straight alliance, is put in place, the better the benefits. So as a parent of an LGBT child, however, you can bring those practices into the home as well. The way that you do that is first and foremost, create a comfortable environment for them to feel comfortable coming out to you. So establish a sense of trust. Establish a secure attachment style for them to come to you and ask questions, and prepare yourself for the conversation. Preparing yourself for the conversation is knowing that you have to be warm and supportive once they come out, and to have resources ready to go if they ask for someone to talk to or different types of therapies. For example, if your child has been a victim of bullying or trauma, you can recommend cognitive behavioral therapy to that child, which is actually supportive in helping the child identify and modify maladaptive thoughts, behaviors, and ideas that they may have, develop coping skills, create social support networks, and increase positive events in their life. Lastly, as a parent, you also have to acknowledge that you do not know everything. You may know some stuff about the LGBT community, but there's a lot of gaps that you have. So discuss those gaps with your child and educate both of you as you go. These are the references that we used throughout the presentation, as well as the image references that we used. We want to thank you for your time and listening to this presentation, and we look forward to answering any question you may have. Have a great day.